Welcome back to Talking Real, brought to you by the Oklahoma Association of Realtors. This is episode 180, and we're here in the studio. Your host, Jeff and Nabil. Nabil, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
I am also fantastic. I'm excited about today. I think I say that every day, but this is the subject that we're going to talk about today.
It's good to be excited every day.
It is good to be excited every day. That's true. But today in particular, I am just thrilled to death to talk about this subject because this is one of my, I guess something that is near and dear to my heart, that I think is really important. And
it's a topic we talk about a lot, not in this sense, but
yeah, it's a little bit different spin. And we talk about technology, we talk about being safe online, and we talk about cybersecurity threats. In fact, I think in our last episode, we talked about a major cybersecurity threat.
Yeah.
With some ransomware attacks that have gone out. And wanted to talk about this concept in a little bit different context. Because, again, we stress how important it is to be smart, to be safe, to know what you're doing.
How important it is to be smart. Yes.
It's important
be smart.
From a technology standpoint. Right?
Yeah.
Like, how technologically savvy are you and those kinds of things. And we stress how important that is. I mean, we really talk about it in the context of it's just mandatory. Right. Like it is in today's world. It's mandatory.
I mean, not, just taking out of being a realtor or business, just in life, everything is technological now. Everything is technology. Like it's crazy. It's so embedded.
Absolutely. I mean, we're at a point now where, I think that we're sort of in a state of affairs where, if you lose the internet, it's like you can't do work that day, right? Like it's if you lose access to your phone, like you can't do work that day all of a sudden. It just everything seems to shut down. Yeah. So when we talk about real estate transactions and we talk about the business of real estate, it's just as applicable in that context as any. That just technology is embedded in real estate and real estate transactions in the practice of real estate. But what we haven't really talked about is whether there is an ethical obligation to be competent with technology, right? There may be some legal requirements to be competent, because if something bad happens, a data breach, ransomware, those kinds of things, maybe you have a civil liability for any harm that's caused from that. Right, so we talked about this ransomware attack, and so now you've got all these businesses' data loss and so forth,
negligence and things like that. Yeah,
there may be that, and what realtors will find with their E&O insurance, a lot of them are now offering cybersecurity coverage. So maybe you're insured against certain losses and those kinds of things. There might also be other like licensing requirements. Sort of depends on your state. I don't think Oklahoma has any general, technological competence requirements in our licensing law. Perhaps there are some things that you could connect to technological competence, that kind of thing, but nothing real specific. And when we talk about the Realtor Code of Ethics, there really isn't an obligation for technological competence specifically in the Code of Ethics. Now, there are some things that are addressing technology, like the obligation to keep your website up to date and accurate, to not make misstatements through technological means. So there's some little nuanced pieces that are in there.
But it's more about portraying accurate information,
right,
rather than anything that you're doing as an individual.
Exactly. But what we don't have is a more general obligation for technological competence in the Code of Ethics. And that's where I wanted to kind of start today, because my position is, at least, that we should have that. That I think that the Code of Ethics should have a general technological competence requirement. So I wanted to talk about that, some corollaries from other industries, maybe talk about some questions, how that would look, all those kinds of things.
It's like when you're applying for a job and you see the list of qualifications, proficient in Word.
Yes, exactly.
At that point, that was like a big deal, right? I mean,
yeah.
Years ago, decades ago,
you would put proficient in the Microsoft Suite, right? So you could do some Excel as well.
Yeah.
But man, it's come so far from there,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's come so far. And what kind of sparked this in my mind is some recent professional standards cases that we've had, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But also the overlap with the legal profession is really what made me realize this could be a possibility,
Mm-hmm.
and why this is important. Because as a lawyer, we have an obligation under our rules of professional conduct for attorneys. So basically, the lawyer's code of ethics that requires technological competence. And that made me think, well, what does our code of ethics require? And sort of found what I considered a gap.
How many loopholes have lawyers found in their code of ethics?
Fair. Hey, we're not putting lawyers on trial today, okay? But fair. So to kind of give you that context, right? So this goes all the way back to 2012, and I kind of started thinking more about this last year. I started teaching a technology and real estate class through our GRI and through our broker in charge course. And one of the things I looked at was this idea of technological competence, like why that's important. And in the legal profession, in 2012, so almost a decade ago,
right
at this point, the American, and listen, the legal profession is never at the cutting edge of anything, right? Like, never. So to think that in 2012, the American Bar Association adopted a model rule of professional conduct that requires lawyers to understand technology, right? It's basically a technological competence requirement to understand the positives and the risks associated with certain technology. And so how you communicate with clients, how you handle client data, how you deal with electronic discovery issues and cases, all of these things fell now within the purview of the lawyer's code of ethics.
And that probably arose from something that probably happened in some cases, just like this thought arose right now.
Absolutely. So what happens with the code of ethics for lawyers is that American Bar Association does a model set of rules, which means it's like a possibility, right? But each state has their own, because each state governs the practice of law. So each state then had to look at, are we going to adopt this? And I think as we stand today, it's something like 39 states, including Oklahoma, have adopted some form of that model rule, if not the exact one, requiring technological competence. So the legal profession has overwhelmingly shifted in this direction of, we're going to mandate that lawyers, in representing their clients, are technologically competent. And if they aren't, that is an ethical violation for lawyers. You have an ethical duty to be competent in technology. And why is this? Well, we're dealing with confidential information of clients. We're dealing with advising our clients on important issues that could have a major economic or financial impact to that client, right? We're dealing with all kinds of sensitive information that the public wouldn't want to know, or that if it was breached by perhaps ransomware or some other malware or whatever, that could create serious harm to our clients as attorneys. Now, what I pose is, do those same things sound awfully similar to what realtors do with their clients, right? Dealing with, major financial transactions, confidential information, financial information, personally identifiable information like social security numbers and driver's license, these kinds of things. You may have access to all those things, and perhaps not even just for your own clients, but it could also be the person on the other side of the transaction that you may come into contact with, that you now have access to through email or other digital files or something. But why does the code of ethics not require specifically for realtors technological competence? That's sort of my question that I arose to, is like, why does this not exist?
Right.
And we can look at like the preamble, and I want to quote just a few things here that sort of lead you down the direction of, that I could argue it's at least within the spirit of the code of ethics that it requires it, but you can't be found in violation of the preamble. The preamble is just aspirational. So
those aren't like the rules that you're following.
Right, the actual articles and rules that you follow. And so, so what are some of the things the code of ethics in the preamble talks about? It talks about things like, that the interests of promoting real estate impose obligations beyond those of ordinary commerce. Right? So we're talking about we have obligations as realtors because of the importance of real estate that go beyond just ordinary commerce.
Right.
Right. That's important.
It's not just a regular transaction.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so it says that they impose grave social responsibility and a patriotic duty to which realtors should dedicate themselves and for which they should be diligent in preparing themselves.
Those strong words.
Those
Grave
are strong words.
and patriotic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So realtors are zealous to maintain and improve the standards of their calling and share with their fellow realtors a common responsibility for its integrity and honor. These are big things, saying that we have to be at the cutting edge. We have to have obligations that exceed ordinary commerce.
And because we're leading the industry forward.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
That's
We're
the key
supposed
here.
to be the voice of real estate. We are the experts. In recognition and appreciation of their obligations to clients, customers, the public, and each other, realtors continuously strive to become and remain informed on issues affecting real estate, and as knowledgeable professionals, they willingly share the fruit of their experience and study with others. Right? These are these lofty ideals that we're talking about, and that we avoid things that may damage the public or which might discredit or bring dishonor to the real estate profession. These, again, very important things.
Mm-hmm.
And the term realtor has come to connote competency, fairness, and high integrity, resulting from adherence to lofty ideals of moral conduct in the business relationships. And this goes on, again, to talk about that realtors pledge to observe in spirit the golden rule that we do to others as we want done to us,
Mm-hmm.
in all their activities, whether conducted personally through associates or others, or via technological means, and to conduct their business in accordance with the tenets set forth below. Okay, so we've got all these things in the preamble to talk about these lofty ideals. We're going to remain informed of issues affecting real estate. We're going to avoid things that harm the public or that give a bad name to the real estate profession. Mm-hmm. Like, that's, if we can't fit technological competence within that, to me, that's just right there on point.
And I mean, technology, like we're saying, is so embedded in everything. That is probably the first contact you make with someone. And if they see that you're not competent or if something goes wrong, that's a bad impression. Absolutely. Just right off the bat.
Absolutely. So then we have to, though, get into, because like I said, you can't be in violation. Like, the preamble is aspirational. It doesn't impose any actual duties on anybody. We have to look at the actual articles. Mm-hmm. And the only articles you find is the stuff that we talked about before, where you've got to keep your website updated. You can't misstate things through technological means, but it's very limited. The closest you can come to a general requirement that you might be able to say would require technological competence, and I think it's a little bit of a stretch, just because it doesn't say it. I think we need to be explicit if we mean it. But Article 1 says that realtors pledge themselves to protect and promote the interests of their client. Now, I can make an argument if you are unsafe online through technology and you harm your client, perhaps you have violated that by doing unsafe things online. You have now failed to protect and promote the interests of your client. But that's like, I don't know, that's pretty loose. It also doesn't protect other realtors. It doesn't protect other realtors' clients. It doesn't protect the public. That's only specific to protecting and promoting your client's interests. So again, this is
limited
where,
scope. Exactly.
It's very limited in scope. And this is where I'll give you an example, sort of. This is a variation on a recent professional standards case. Okay, so you've got a realtor engaging with technology in some way. Okay, and
i.e. their phone,
or
a computer,
email, something.
Right. Everyone interacts with their technology every day.
Yeah. And they have clicked on something that they should have known was raising red flags. That was a problem. Okay, this is something that, like, if you are technologically competent, and when I say competent, I don't mean an expert. I mean you're competent, right? You have a base level of competency on how to do these things. You would have known not to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
that you could identify the red flags.
Exactly.
Right.
That this was not the most sophisticated thing in the world. Like, you should know I shouldn't click on this.
It's like you're saying, competency versus expertise. Like, you don't need to know what's going to happen if you click it. You just need to know that you should not click it.
Yes. And that act then led to, because of the chain of direct causation and events, led to some kind of harm to the other side of the transaction. okay, they like something occurred over there, something
Mhm.
negative occurred because this realtor clicked on something they shouldn't have,
Right.
and they know they should have known they shouldn't have.
Breach of information,
Yep. So say it's
ransomware, whatever it could be.
exactly.
Right?
Say it's a breach of information or malware or something.
Yeah.
That in this case perhaps also led to the termination of this transaction. So the transaction actually fell apart. So you can trace this. Realtor clicks on something they shouldn't have, harm to the other party, everything fell apart. Because of this, as a direct result, people don't trust each other anymore. Now that transaction fails. Okay. But when you look at the code of ethics, it is, I would argue, impossible to find an article that is directly on point to that scenario, right?
Because Article 1 would not cover that.
Right. You could stretch perhaps Article 1 to say that this realtor failed to protect and promote the interests of their client because what they did ultimately led to the transaction falling apart. But the complaint didn't come from their clients, right? And so it'd be hard for the other party to come assert a claim on behalf of the client that's not found, right? So it's like, how do you connect that?
Right.
And this is where I think that the code of ethics needs to be clear to say you must be, as an ethical obligation to all parties in the transaction and the public and everybody else, you owe a duty, it's an ethical obligation to be technologically competent. And that, I think, is where the code of ethics is perhaps lacking, and that there needs to be a modification to the code of ethics somewhere to impose that duty. And like, again, what do we talk about when we talk about competence? This is something from a legal ethics opinion from California when they adopted it. They had this opinion, and they were talking about e-discovery, and that's just electronic discovery. So that's not just, I'm going to give you a stack of paper files, but it's also understanding that there's
Where are your letters?
Yes, there's information behind that.
Right.
Like you and I talked about before we started with an email, for example. Some of that may be some of this other data that goes with it, of like, when was it sent? Who was it sent to?
What server did it come from?
Right, and it goes even deeper than that, right? It talks about metadata. So when you're looking at a document that was created, when was it created? Who created it? How many times was it modified? Who modified it? These are things that are integral parts of being a lawyer now. And so this fits within that e-discovery.
To catch fraud and
exactly
fake things.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. It's important to have all the information related to that evidence. And so what this case, this legal opinion said is that if e-discovery will probably be sought, so if you're engaging in electronic information as an attorney in this case, the duty of competence requires an attorney to assess his or her own e-discovery skills and resources as part of that attorney's duty to provide competent representation. So competency requires, I need to know whether I can handle this. Am I capable of dealing with this technological component of this case? And if you lack such skills and or resources, the attorney must try to acquire sufficient learning and skill or associate or consult with someone with expertise to assist. So I have to be able to know where I am right now. Am I capable of doing this? If I'm not, I have to either be able to learn how to do it or find somebody who can do it.
Right.
Right. And so that's sort of what we're talking about competence. Do you know how competent you are? Like, can you look at something and say, I don't know that I can handle this?
And that's a difficult question to ask someone, right? Be like, are you competent in doing this? Pride and ego would say yes, a lot of times. But if there's something to hold you accountable to the fact that you're not, you're probably going to look at it more objectively than subjectively.
Yeah.
And be like, okay, I kind of know this part of it, but I don't know, like we're talking about, for example, emails. I don't know how to get into the metadata and the servers and, all that extra stuff, deleted, all that stuff. I don't know how to get to.
Yeah.
So I will get someone to help me on that. But, if there was nothing holding you to it, be like, oh yeah, I looked at the emails and this is what it is and that's it.
Right. So some examples, right? And maybe these aren't as applicable today, but e-signatures are a thing now.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is something that people are familiar with, and it's maybe an absurd thing now, but say you're in this scenario, especially in the market today, where things are happening so fast and like you can't delay to get a transaction. So if you were undertaking representation and saying, oh, I don't really know how to use e-signatures, so I have to print this out. I have to go meet with my clients and get their signatures, and then I'm going to go, I guess, fax it if they have a fax machine. I'm competent enough to do fax, but not necessarily scan it and email it or whatever. I don't have the technological competence to deal with electronic signatures and transmission of an offer. Are you, I mean, should that not at this point be an ethical breach that you can't adequately and ethically and competently represent your client if you don't know how to deal with this technology?
Right, because that would be detrimental to your client.
Absolutely.
Because they're not going to get their stuff in that time.
And similar scenario, if you're not competent understanding timestamps on emails and when offers are submitted and so forth, offers have expiration dates and expiration times. And so when that is sent is important. You need to know whether it was sent within the time frame before it expired.
Right.
Like, this is important stuff. And if you don't know how to understand that stuff, you either need to learn or find somebody that you can associate with that can fill that gap for you.
Right.
And like that to me should be an absolute ethical obligation, mandatory, not just a lofty ideal that we should aspire to. It has to be.
Right.
Like, why is that important? Well, what is every single company and entity out there that's trying to disrupt the real estate industry and disrupt what realtors do? What are they relying on? What are they doing? Technology.
I mean, that's what it's been.
These are tech companies.
Yeah.
Right? They're trying to make the transaction happen online. They're trying to, everything that they're trying to do relies on technology. And so if we can't compete with that by staying technologically competent, then I think we've got a real problem. And that's where I think it has to be an ethical obligation. Because what does that do? Well, it specifically states that you as a realtor, you've got to make sure that you're staying educated, or if you've got gaps in your knowledge, you've got to figure out how to fill them with other people or something. You've got to figure out how to fill that gap so that you can competently represent your clients. Otherwise, that's going to give a bad name to the whole industry. It's going to cause problems for your clients. And then it creates that accountability. Not only does it set the requirement that you have to do it, but now it's accountable that if you've done something that harms a party to a transaction because of technological incompetence, then you can be held accountable by your peers through the professional standards process in order to make sure that we're enforcing that obligation. You have to. It's non-negotiable anymore. This is not something that we can play around with anymore. It is absolutely imperative that you are protecting data of all parties, that you're making sure that you are doing things to prevent wire fraud that has become billions of dollars of harm to people, that realtors have been held liable for through court cases. That needs to be an ethical obligation. It just absolutely has to become a priority.
Right. And I mean, you hit on pretty much everything, because as a reliance on technology increases, because obviously the companies that are trying to disrupt the real estate industry, there are things that we're going to have to adopt from them and then mold into the realtor world, right? You have to, because you take this is one of my favorite disruption examples, Uber and taxis, right?
Yeah.
Uber came in, taxis said, no, we're not going to try to we'll just try to shut them down and not work. Uber took over, taxis went down, but now taxis also you can call taxis on an app.
Yep.
Right? So they were okay, we have to evolve to be able to do it. So you have to adopt some of the technology. But by doing so, they're now exposing themselves to technological risk if they're not competent in using it.
Yeah.
So this is a very imperative topic.
Yeah, it is. And I think, I hope that this discussion kind of gets people thinking in that line. Because again, what I saw recently in a professional standards case was what I would consider, based on the explanation provided by the respondent, a breach of technological competence, right? I think it would fit within this concept of technological competence that they failed to maintain competence. The problem is the facts that resulted from that caused harm to the transaction, but ultimately when the professional standards hearing panel looked at it, they sort of their back was against the wall to some degree, where they had no, this just doesn't fit perfectly within the code of ethics. But if we had an obligation of technological competence, there could have been accountability there because there was some harm caused. And I don't think that we want to get into that venue of when we're talking about being competent in real estate, our code of ethics should speak to that and not be like, well, maybe there's another venue that would better handle that. Really, to me, the issue there is like we've got a gap in our code of ethics that we've got to get with the lawyers in 2012, and now that's 2021. Like we got to start looking at this as an actual ethical mandate because things aren't slowing down, things aren't changing, and we've got to have those expectations because there's so much at stake. If there is a wire fraud incident, if there's a ransomware incident, if there's any kind of breach of private data.
And those are getting so much more prevalent.
Absolutely.
And so much more sophisticated and harder to spot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I completely agree. And we have to be, as an organization, at that forefront saying we are going to have the loftiest, most just ideals, but also as a requirement that we're going to be smart on this stuff.
And we're trying to hit our ideals.
Absolutely.
Right? That's kind of where it's going.
Yep. So my position is, at this point, the code of ethics, it essentially makes it a recommendation or a lofty ideal through the preamble. But I think we need to incorporate it explicitly in the code of ethics.
And make it a requirement.
I think so. I think it needs to be an article change, standard of practice added, something that is specifically speaking to a more general technological competence requirement. And then we can have some case interpretations that come after that provide examples, which is really the exact same thing that they did in the legal profession, right? They adopted this model provision, many states adopted it, and then they issued these ethics interpretations, basically case studies that come after that to say, this is how we interpret this. It's the exact same thing that the Realtors do through the code of ethics. And I think that that's what needs to happen in this case. I think it's a really important step. We recently went through that step of adding our standard practice 10-5, was dealt with discriminatory remarks, even in personal life and those kinds of things. I think that was a phenomenal step, something important for today. And I think this technological component is also really important for something that needs to be done to look at, to be just more specific on it.
That's right. I mean, I think we talked about this for about 20-25 minutes, and it's important. If you don't think technology and being competent at technology is important right now, reassess.
Well, you put that real kindly. I think, man, that was a good way to put it. Reassess your position.
Right.
But I think I would be curious to hear what other people think about this idea of, should it be an ethical obligation,
and what that might look like.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so this was just like a real overview of it. Give some people some ideas to start thinking through. Just gonna lay that groundwork of, what do you think? Should it be a technological competent requirement within the code of ethics? Send us your feedback. You can email us at podcast@okrealtors.com, and that'll come to Nabil and I, and give us your thoughts. I'd love to hear your feedback. We could talk about that on a future show.
Yeah.
The feedback that we get, if we get some good stuff there. Some questions that you have about it, because we can talk about it again, sort of unpack some questions and thoughts and concerns people have. Again, this is not something that we can just add here and there. Like, this would have to go through the National Association and all that. But
tomorrow you have to be technologically competent.
Yeah, but I think it's a good discussion to have and get feedback from people. I just be really curious what people think.
And I wonder if other people are thinking along the same lines, right?
Yeah.
You'd be like, oh, I've been thinking about this for the past couple of years, et cetera, et cetera. That'd be interesting to see, like, that is trending.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. So again, email us. You can email us podcast@okrealtors.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this idea of the ethics of technological competence.
That's right. Let's get into the gray area.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you haven't done so yet, hit that subscribe button so you know when the next episode is out, and share this episode, probably in particular. Actually, share all the episodes, but this one in particular, to realtors that are either on the same mindset as you, or maybe they're on the other side that you want to convince to get on the same mindset as you.
Absolutely. I think it's an interesting topic, and something that, again, I think we've sort of been talking about it for a lot of time, right? Technology is nothing new. We talk about it all the time, but I think this is a little bit different angle that I personally haven't really heard anybody else talk about. So I think it's kind of interesting.
And I mentioned sides. It's really just to get people thinking about the topic, right? Like, once you start thinking critically about it, we'll be able to get to a consensus and a conclusion, and I think
Absolutely.
reassess.
So check it out. Send us some feedback. We'd love to hear what you think. And again, like Neil said, share it with a friend. And until next time, we'll see you next Tuesday on Talking Real.